Are you sure you want to be a Chiser?
I'm ready. I want to do it. I feel like I've already proved myself, and
Yeah, yeah,
I love what the Chisers stand for, and I'm ready. I want to meet the person in charge.
yeah. You did very well on your tests. So, if just final answer, making sure we got this. Okay.
I'm in
All right.
100%.
All right. Get ready to meet Hermione. Hey, Josh, how you doing? You want to be a Chiser?
The leader of your organization is a dog, a small dog.
Well, yeah. A Chiser is a mini Schnauzer and Chihuahua combination. So that's what she is.
I was promised like great wealth and power if I joined this organization.
There is nothing
They,
more powerful than love, Josh.
we're talking about factions on J&J Tabletop.
How's it going, everybody? I'm Jake from JNJtabletop, and with me is, as always, my good friend Josh. So today we're talking about factions, and actually, we had a request in our Discord, Chaotic and Writer. Go check out his blog and website at chaoticandwriter.com. He asked, "What makes a good faction?" And his question seemed to scope kind of the more than just TTRPGs, but like movies and things like that. But we thought that made a really good video topic, so yeah, here we are.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this one because there's certain topics like this that it's been on my list for a while, but it's something I really wanted to put a lot of thought into before actually doing it. And then having someone say like, "Hey, you should talk about this," just forces me to be like, all right, we're gonna do it. I need to prepare."
Yeah,
um,
fires us up.
but I guess first off, what is a faction, right? Faction, another name for a faction is like an organization, right? So it could be anything from like your local fighters guild to like just the kids club, the Goonies, the
Nice.
um Little Rascals, like whatever it may be, the Dead Poets Society, like
Yeah.
all forms of factions in one way or another. A good faction is going to add culture to your world. It's going to add hooks to your games. It's gonna be something that your players want to engage with. So one way just to start off and making a good faction is to give them some sort of like definable goals or agendas, and then as best you can like tie that into the campaign setting too. So one of the one of the best things that a faction could do would be like address some sort of flaw in society,
Hmm.
right? You could talk about this from like, we could go to some sort of crazy cult of the dragon or whatever, where the problem in society is that Tiamat is not there and they want to bring her back, and that's gonna make things better somehow. Or you could go to like real life and you could talk about like the civil rights movement and all of that kind of stuff, and
Mm.
these are still factions that are actively trying to make a change.
St. Jude's would be another good example.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. It's just any sort of organization, especially if it's trying to correct a flaw in society. They have a goal and they're taking some sort of steps to achieve that goal or fix that problem.
I kind of always looked at it as a simple way to look at this might be like a faction or is just some kind of organized group of people that have a purpose for meeting. And, you know, using St. Jude's or Love 146, some of these like charities are really good examples for, coming up with ideas for factions. They see a need in society that isn't being met, whether it's by a government or some other group of people, and they decided to do something about it. And that's why they meet or organize and try. They have it gives a purpose to why this faction or organization is in existence. So I think that is definitely something that needs to be present in order for the faction, even if it's just like
Yeah,
we like to laugh, so we drink and tell jokes, or I don't know.
I love Love 146 as an example too, because that can tie in maybe a little later. with how it's this organization that's worldwide, and they have their offices, and in the place that they have them, they have their safe houses and all that kind of stuff. But then they also have local task forces, and that is like a place where, and this is like, shoot, I mean, check in the doobly doo, because we're going to have links to Love 146 for this video. They're an incredible organization, and if you're not behind that cause, then you're a monster. So check them out and support them as best you can. One of the ways you could do that is a really cool thing that happens with factions, which is a task force, which is like a local, almost like a just local cell, a group of people who they might have like a leader who is loosely connected to that faction. They might not be employed by that faction or whatever, but they have some sort of contact with the main leadership. And now they're giving some sort of information of like the goal or whatever, and they're told, go out and figure out how you could achieve that goal the best way possible. So they gather a group of people locally, and then they all do their own thing in trying to
Yeah.
achieve that goal. And
That's a very common method.
it is.
Like I remember walking down the street growing up, and you just walk past like the Marines, and there's a guy that's the local Marine recruiter, or whoever, organization, military, doesn't matter. They're going to be having
Some
that,
sort of. So aside from, what isn't always like a selfish goal of trying to fix a flaw in society, it still could be, but like aside from that, you could literally just have an organization or faction that all they want to do is make some money. They want to get rich. You could also have one where they're trying to gain knowledge on something specific. Like maybe you are some sort of warlock in Destiny, and you're just trying to learn specifically about the Hive. You're one of the followers of Osiris, and you're just out there on Mercury. I think you're out there on Mercury.
Our D2 lore is a little hazy.
Just trying to learn everything you can about the Vex. There's a lot of really cool stuff you could do, even with like our own society too, when it comes to like gathering knowledge. Because like we were talking just a second ago, just about like specific like scientists, whether like you're doing medical research or like any sort of testing like that, just trying to learn about like something specific. There's so much that goes into that, and so many different organizations in our own world that are literally designed to just gather as much information and research about one specific subject.
And that can easily translate into a TTRPG. Wizards equals scientists pretty much every time. So, in our Ancient Relics and Hokey Religions gameplay, we've got our group has this like seemingly weapon of mass destruction in our bag of holding that we're like, good God, please don't go off on us. So this is something we're trying to figure out as much about this as we can, and we are trying to find a faction that would have any idea of how to research.
And your specific reason for going to the place you went to, well, I mean, there's other stuff involved, and catch up on that show because it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But
we had two ideas in mind as to how to go about learning about this. And we ended up choosing one, which actually might let us loop around and do both, depending on how we do that.
Your reason for going there was because you wanted to learn about the corruption, right? How many different organizations do you think there are trying to figure out what happened and what they could learn from the construction, from the corruption, and from like whether they're trying to fix it or whether they're trying to use that power to their benefit or anything like that? Any sort of event, if there's an event that happened in your world and it was something crazy, and let me just say that you should have an event somewhere in your world that was something crazy. There's going to be people that gather around it. There's going to be people that make theories about it.
Yep.
And those people are going to group together, and they're going to try to do everything they can and put resources and power into, one, like learning about it, but two, also just proving that their theory on the subject is correct, which is another fun thing, because if you have people trying to gain knowledge, just like objective knowledge, that's great. But what could also be fun and give your guilds a little personality is like, yeah, they're trying to gain knowledge, but they're looking at it through the scope of, I'm trying to gain knowledge to prove my hypothesis correct. and that's going to change everything. Anything that's presented to them, it's going to be looked at differently because of that.
Yeah. Any organization, I mean, they can come in all shapes and sizes. Like they don't have to be massive, you know. Like
Mm-hmm.
you referenced the Dead Poet Society as an example. That was just a group of kids, you know, that liked poetry, and they were just expanding their cultural knowledge in that way. You know, it can be small, it can be large. You
Yeah,
know, you can have some silly stuff in your games and some things like that. You can base an entire story on if it's handled in a really adept way.
I
You know,
totally agreed.
and you know, one thing I like to think about, at least in the scope of a TTRPG, is it should in some way potentially be joinable. I think, you know, I think that would be really. Uh, it seems like that door should always at least have the option to being opened.
I think it's really nice to have factions. Honestly, it's kind of nice to have both. Like, have factions that your players will like want to join and be able to join, but it'd also be kind of cool to have a faction that no matter how hard they try, they can't get into it, or they don't even know how to get into it because it's so secretive.
Yeah, Josh,
Um,
like as much as you try, like you're not going to qualify to be a Chiser.
that's fine.
Yeah,
I honestly, I love Miney. I remember when she was a pup,
she
but
still seems like she's a pup because she's so
I
small.
I prefer shepherds.
Fair enough.
So like now I'm thinking like what would be a reason why you couldn't just join some sort of organization? Like you can't just go there on the day that they're doing their trials and like pass their trials and whatever. Like maybe they have to come find you or something and you have to be worthy first. Well, maybe this is probably like the last goal that I don't think we mentioned. Or I'm sure there's other goals, but this is the last one I could think of. That's an organization that's trying to gain some sort of power or influence or control over like other factions, um, kingdoms, cities, the world. You know, maybe they're trying to make up a plan to take over the world. You know, like anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. No,
And
it's true. If they all come in all shapes and sizes, you can have a small faction with some big personalities in it, and
yeah,
sometimes the ambition's there. Now all of a sudden you have a really compelling story to tell with this faction. Maybe they take crazy risks, and it's like, oh, what the heck is this thing?
I think that's where you can have a lot of fun with factions when they have like goals that whether it's for a good reason or a not so good reason it's like a really extreme and it's really going to affect your setting if that faction is allowed to gain power. And that
Mm,
allows you to put your players in an interesting position because if they learn about that faction, yeah, they could try to join it, or maybe they try to stop that faction. Maybe they get in the way, and then maybe that's actually a reason why that secretive faction, that faction that
yes.
doesn't want you, now they want you because you've tried so hard to stop them, you've screwed things up so badly for them that now Dr. No is interested in you and he's like, would you like to join Spectre?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, especially if the players, this is again a way you can give them agency over the world, right? Depending on the goals of these factions. If the players also start to gain some kind of expertise or really a reputation for getting things done, well, yeah, a faction's gonna come looking for them, right? Like, one of my favorite TV shows is Monk. He's like the greatest investigator there is, and eventually people just seek him out. Like, I need you to figure this thing out for me because you're the best. The
Yeah.
factions are a great way to tell stories and throw plot hooks out there.
And if we're gonna go to like another uh, TV show, we talk about like White Collar. I don't know if you've ever seen White Collar, but yeah,
Oh yeah,
I mean, you have a guy who is like he did forging. I think is was his main thing that he did. Knows a ton, really smart dude.
mm-hmm.
FBI trying so hard to stop him. They finally arrest him. He gets arrested, and then now they want him to solve high profile cases for them because he proved that
Classic.
he was such an expert. Like, and
Yeah.
that's happened in real life too, like with like Now You
Oh
See
yeah.
Me. I think no, not Now You See. That's a magician movie.
Catch me if
Catch
you
Me If You
can.
Can. Yeah,
Yep.
that's it's a true story, right? Of like someone who was
Yeah.
so good at what he did that our government was like, all right, we finally stopped you. Now we need your help. Like,
Well, they also kind of have you over a barrel because it's like, do this or go to jail.
yeah.
But that could be part of it, you know. Maybe a
Hmm.
faction says, I need to influence these PCs. I'm going to figure out what's important to them, what they hold dear, and I'm going to use that to get to what I need to out of them.
Hmm.
There you go.
And this is all, these are all things that you could do to really make your faction matter and have it add to the world, add to the campaign, and make the players care about it, whether it's that they hate it or that they love it or that they feel someplace in the middle. They have some sort of feeling towards it because of the stories that you're telling around it. Um, Another thing I like to think about for factions is like, I want to know how big they are, right? So,
Hmm.
does it span like just one city or town, or is it like a country, or is it over like an entire continent? Like, what kind of numbers do they have? You know, like there could be a local fighters guild, or you could have this massive fighters guild that has, you know, some sort of headquarters or just like meeting room or house in every town. An organization like that, that's going to tie into our last point too, where like if they're that powerful that they have a representative in every town, you know, they're probably going to be pissed off at other guilds that try to come up, other fighting guilds that try to
Mm-hmm.
start up after that. You know, they
Oh,
want to
yeah.
want a cut of it.
Especially once you start thinking about factions and how they relate to each other. So if we just take Wildmount, for example, right? You have the Dwendalian Empire. That is a faction. It's also a nation, but alongside the Dwendalian Empire, or even I guess as a sub faction, you have the Cerberus Assembly. They often are allied with the Empire's interests, but they have their own agenda. That's what they do. I mean, of course, mages think they're going to be, they should be in charge. That's what mages do. But at the same time, a lot of times they're going to be side by side, but there's all these little backwater deals that can be happening. That's when you can start to have some fun interpolitics and all sorts of you know, intrigue. If you're really into intrigue, that would be a very good a good thing to explore with your factions. Like, how do they all relate to each other? Like, does the Fighters Guild, do they just not respect the Mages Guild because they're like, they need to cheat, they use magic, I know
Yeah,
how to actually get my hands dirty. You know, that could be like a silly, more of like a Skyrim example. But like, you know, and then there's the Thieves Guild that's just like, you guys can fight, kill each other, and then I'll just pick off the remaining people and take all the loot.
it's interesting when you think about like how other guilds like interact with each other and that kind of stuff, or other factions interact with each other. Because you take something like the Golden Rose, right? They're they have a presence in a lot of cities, and they're in complete control of Havenport, right? They have their own thorns as their military thug force, but they still respect the Iron Gauntlets, and the Iron Gauntlets still respect the Golden Rose, especially when they're in the city that is controlled by the Golden Rose. And especially like you're talking
Yeah.
about intrigue and stuff like that. Intrigue is like some of the best political adventure type things that you could have is when you're in, we'll call it like frenemy territory, right?
Yes. Yes.
And you kind of have to like tiptoe through, you know, maybe you're like
Yeah.
you're Sansa in in King's Landing, and you just
Absolutely.
have to do your best just to kind of get by without like pissing too many people off, but you still have your positions that you're trying to
Hmm.
push forward. And
As things come to a head, and it's just like, oh, I don't want to work with them. They're awful. But like, that might be the only way you could achieve your goals, and both
yeah,
sides realize that. That's when you get these tensions. You get everything is rising, and it makes character decisions much more interesting when the slightest misstep could cause a faction war or a real war or whatever it
hmm
may be. That's uh, because even at the end of the day, if it is successful in some way or another, maybe they achieved what they set out to do. If something just was weird about the way they went about it, that could just be great for tons more plot hooks and stories to tell in your games.
I think something that, like, speaking of, tiptoeing around like topics and conversations or whatever, I think one thing we've kind of been tiptoeing around here is like how powerful is the organization, right? So you could be talking about an organization that's really powerful in its small area, but then there's other organizations that might be really powerful in like the entire world or like the country, um,
Mm.
and how, like, what they do with that power, right? Because they could be really powerful in terms of like maybe they're law enforcement and they're just like respected in their one small scope of things where it's like yeah, like you have full authority to find anyone who uh rolls a d12 and lands on a 3 on the sidewalk on a Tuesday afternoon, like, like whatever. um, but then you could also have, we'll just say, like, one of my favorite organizations in anything uh would be the Chantry in Dragon Age, the entire Dragon Age
Oh,
series.
Dragon Age gets it
um
right.
they just, on every level, Dragon Age
Yeah,
gets it right. Like,
yeah.
that's, if you want to learn world building, just play Dragon Age Origins and pay attention to how they introduce things and what's happening around you, the different
Yep.
players, and it's perfection. The game itself isn't necessarily perfect, but like the world, perfection.
Which goes a long way in covering the warts of the game itself, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does.
So think about that.
Um, yeah, think about that as a DM, and like whatever mistakes you make, there's no mistake too big to come back from, especially if you're doing things right in the world building department. But so the Chantry, right? They are not so powerful in, say, I think the what is it, Orlais or something like that. I don't remember the other continent
That's like the
there.
French one is Orlais.
Yeah, exactly. They're
Yeah.
not so powerful there, but in like Ferelden and that whole area that like the entire first two games take place in, they have control over how
So
laws
much.
are made. They have
Yep.
control over so many little things, even mages, right? Now you have a whole other organization that's created specifically because of how much power the Chantry has, right? Because of their specific beliefs, they believe that mages should be in some sort of control. So now you have another organization made for them, which is the Circle, and then you have another organization controlled by the Chantry, which are the Templars, who are the people who keep the mages in check.
Yep.
Like,
Oh yeah.
there's so many levels to that, right? And that just shows like this, the Chantry is not a political organization. It's a church,
But they wield
right?
tons of political power,
They
which
wield
is
tons of political power.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's
It's
interesting
like
because, like you said, there's the scope, right? So if you use, say, like the Catholic Church, especially in the Middle Ages,
mhm.
and say, France, the King of France is in charge, but the Catholic Church is there, and the Catholic Church has influence over Italy and all the other countries in Europe. So the king and the cardinal who's like assigned to France, that's a very significant relationship because both have their moments where they trump the other one. The Chantry is in a very similar situation in the world of Thedas.
Yeah, I think the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages is such a perfect example too of like a very powerful faction, because even like you look at knights and their code of honor and chivalry and like all that kind of stuff, that comes, that is also because of the Catholic Church, right? The reason why
Yeah.
they had to do their like, you know we'll go to war for the king and this, that, and the other thing, or for the monarch, we will be these strong brutal people when we need to be, but religion says that we also have to
Yes.
be honorable and like
Hmm.
respectful, and of course, like that is not always the case, and probably often not the case.
Many
But
atrocities have been done in the name of God. That is true.
yes, absolutely. The fact that that's even a thing in general of like, oh, we have to have this code of honor and be good and this, that, and the other thing is because of the amount of power the church had. Um,
Yeah, I mean, just look at the Middle Ages. I mean, they called for the Crusades. That was countries had to unite and follow the banner there in order to do their thing.
mhm.
That's
Yep.
it gets very interesting, especially when you're like, oh well, you know, one of my favorite NPCs. If you ever anyone's ever watched the TV show Heart of Dixie, it's not really a TTRPG thing, but the town reverend, it became like this meme. Like he would just like come by and be like, oh no, big guy, you don't want to disappoint the big guy, you know. And so they'd be like, all right, Reverend, I'll volunteer for such and such or whatever it was. So like, it's a silly and can be used in a fun way in your games, but don't be afraid to lean into that as a DM. Like, oh man. And players, don't be afraid to lean into that as something your character has, because that creates a very rich storytelling experience.
Mhm. Yeah, this is what I mentioned like in the very beginning too, which is like a good organization is creating culture and making your world come alive.
Yeah, it
If you
becomes
have
real.
organization, mhm. If when you have powerful organizations, and again, like your local fighters guild is not gonna, you're not gonna have like little sayings or whatever, like things like what we're talking about in regards to your local fighters guild, unless maybe they're really big in this one town. Um, but having organizations that are not even political organizations there, like whether it's religious or studious or whatever, having these organizations affect, like they're so powerful that someone could say like, oh, you don't want to disappoint the big guy or like whatever, and like one, what they're talking about, right? That's huge. That's something that we don't think about. Like if I say that to you, whether you're an atheist, agnostic, Christian, Muslim, whatever, if I say that, you know what I'm talking
You
about.
get the reference, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
um, so having that in there, it's that is culture, and that even that in and of itself speaks to that organization and how powerful it is. And that's something that you really want to have in your games. Not specifically that example, but just something like that.
So Josh, if if you're talking about organizations here, how, and we joked about it in the beginning of the this video here, is it something that just like anybody can just join any organization? Like, do you feel like that's important to this discussion?
I think that's really important to like specific organizations, right? Because sometimes there is something like let's keep going with church type stuff, right?
Let's
Like
do it.
we'll go to the Pastafarians, right? If you want to be in the Church of the FSM, the Flying Spaghetti Monster, you just are, right? Anyone is, and it's whatever. Um, there you could have organizations like that where it's literally just like give them $5, they'll give you your pin that you could put on your cloak, and like whatever, whether you have to pay your dues or whether you have to go to a certain amount of meetings per month, or like however you do it, you could have that. But not every organization is going to be like that, and not every organization should be like that. Like we mentioned earlier, there could be organizations that, one, they're secretive and you don't even know about them until you cross their path, and they were supposed to kill you when that happened, but you won and you showed how powerful you were. And now they either hate you and they want to kill you, or they can't deny how strong you are now and they want you to join them.
Yeah.
And I think that is especially for like a D&D party, right? Like that's a really interesting little thing to throw in there, right? Like it's this organization that it's really exclusive. You didn't even know about it. But now that you know about it, you either join or die.
It's yeah, or unless you're like the Men in Black and you can flashy thing the memory away.
That's another great one,
I just thought
right?
of it. Yeah, that's
That's that is a perfect secret organization. I mean, well, I don't want to call it a perfect secret organization. It's a fun movie, but we can't call it perfect.
no, but maybe maybe in your games, right? Let's just use 5e. Maybe in your games, this situation shows up like you had, like you just mentioned, and maybe there's a in this organization there's a mage that can cast modify memory and might use it on on whichever party they feel sympathetic to and be like, you need to get lost. Like go, just run now. Like this doesn't, this, maybe they're protecting you by modifying the memory of their companion, or who knows. But yeah, that could be a very fun way to have the Men in Black in your in your game, I guess. But maybe actually that would be really fun, right? Maybe they're constantly looking for extraplanar entities that are very common in the world here. But you know, maybe there's aberrations and fiends and celestials all over the place, but nobody has any idea at all.
Oh man,
That could be fun.
that
That
would
could
be
be.
really fun. Not
And
like
then
a
this
one shot,
paladin,
but
yeah, and then this paladin pops out divine sense and is like, "Holy crap, they're everywhere!"
oh, that's great. Yeah, I love that. I think I'm shocked no one has done that yet. I think that we should do that at some point, and not a one shot, but maybe like a capped off at like 5 parts or
Like a
something like
mini
that.
series, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That could be great.
If you want us to do that, let us know in the comments.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Um, but so we talked about the super secret ones. We talked about the can anyone join, and yeah, there's plenty of organizations like that. But also like maybe it is like the Fighters Guild where there's a local contact, right? You find their local contact, you talk to your Marine recruiter. Um, you're gonna have to fill out some paperwork. They're going to have to ask you some questions, all this kind of stuff. Then maybe there's some
Yep.
sort of like training that you have to go through. And as long as you excel in the training, then boom, you're part of the organization. Maybe it is just well known that like once a year or once every 4 years, similar again to real life, would be like a local police department. They do their test every 4 years, and uh, well, I mean, they're the highest paid cops in the country, so literally everyone takes this test every 4 years. And if you get a 95 or above, then maybe
Maybe.
you get called to the next trials. So like
Yeah.
maybe it's known that like every however many years there's these trials to join this
Yep.
organization, and there's some sort of whether it's prestige or wealth or anything
Yeah.
that like you're
Or some
getting
kind of distant noble relation.
titles or lands or like access to some sort of power that you then gain from doing this. Well, that's going to be a huge event every 4 or 5 years or however often it is. Like so many people are going to come and try to do this, and that's another thing that you could add for culture and like story hooks in your game. Because whether your players are interested in it or not, if they're in this city at the time of this event, like
Oh
that's going to be
yeah.
a huge
Yeah.
festival thing. You're going to be
Mhm.
seeing people from all over the globe suddenly showing up to this event all kitted out, and like that's
Yeah. Full of trying to prove something to everybody. All of it.
and
Again,
that's good.
adventure rich environment right there.
Yes, exactly. That's the type of culture that that your factions should add to the world. Again, not every faction needs to do that, but you should absolutely have a faction like that in your world, just because oh man, I think that would be so much fun to
Oh,
just
100%.
even like your group. If I presented you with that, none of you would join that organization.
Oh God, no.
None of you. But the stories that we could tell during the week or 2 weeks or however many weeks of trials, if you guys are in that same city as it's happening, it's exactly what you said. It's a story rich, adventure rich environment.
And that's what culture ultimately is going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know, even just a few weeks ago, we had Baron Eve. You know, that was that added culture to the land of Wildmount, which is why I love when campaign settings have just little pieces of information like that. It adds so
Mm-hmm.
much.
Another one I like is like something an organization that like you could only join by performing like some sort of ritual or something to join it, right?
Yeah,
Like you have to go to this place at this time of year during like a full moon or whatever and make whatever concoction, put it in this thing and send out whatever smoke signal and then they'll find you.
or even just to lean into Dragon Age again. Like, here, drink this thing. If you don't die, you made it.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that should exist like within your organizations.
yeah, this is
Absolutely. They
this is
need
the
to
next
have
level.
yeah. They need to have their rules like that where it's like, okay, all right, we're going to put you with a senior officer and then they're going to help you find this thing and then you're going to hunt darkspawn, take their blood, you don't know why, and then we're going to make you drink it, and by now it's too late because you know about it.
That was so cool because then it's just like the there's even more lasting consequences to drinking darkspawn blood too. Like it's not
Yeah,
just like, yeah, it gives you the ability to know what's going on, but
you're
there's
gonna
more
die.
to it than that. Yeah, like it's you only got so much time left.
But like that would happen after you already know about after you're already within an organization. Kind of like what I'm trying to tie into right now is like literally there's some sort of ritual just to be like found, just to meet your contact, right? And I think the most obvious one that most of us have, if you've played a video game, if you've played Skyrim or any of the other Elder Scrolls games, man, just take out an arrow, shoot it at some random person, and
That's
then a
my
couple
guy.
days later, a couple days later, you'll get a letter
I know what
from
you
the
did.
Dark Brotherhood. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I still know what you did last summer.
And maybe you have, maybe it's not that extreme, right? Maybe you have like a thieves guild where it's just like it's known that you, if you steal whatever coin and put it in whatever fountain or something, then like they've taken note of you now and they'll come find you if or when they're interested. Little things like that, because those are really interesting, especially when you think about like how did your character even hear about that? How did they know to do that?
Maybe they
um
stumbled on it by accident too.
that's how I stumbled on the Dark Brotherhood, but
Oh heck,
you
you're like,
know.
oh crap! I guess there's no witnesses. I guess it's fine.
No,
You're,
I saw a patrol of stormcloaks and I fired an arrow off at them from far
yeah,
away when I was a neutral target, and I was, they would tell
gotcha.
me to get lost if I walked up to him, but I
Yep.
decided to fight him instead.
Who hasn't killed stormcloaks like that?
Yes, I'm an Imperial in Skyrim. It's not because I don't agree with the Stormcloak cause. It's because I don't agree with Ulfric. In the words of, I don't remember the character's name, maybe Sawyer from Lost, not Penny's boat. Get off the island, but don't take Penny's boat.
But that also adds up another interesting thing, right? So if we're obviously the whole point of discussing factions is to be able to at some point create your own and add them to your games, right? So you mentioned you could have some there could be a disconnect between the personality, bonds, ideals, and flaws of say the leader, and dare I say it, Josh, that your factions should have a personality, bonds, flaws, and ideals. Like there could be a little bit of a disconnect there, which can create tension within the faction, right? As particularly when it comes to the to factions like bonds, ideals, like that's going to be the crux of what the function of this faction is for. This
Mm-hmm.
is why they exist, right? So we use like St. Jude's or Love 146. They're trying to end human trafficking, or raise money and take care of kids that can't afford medical costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And no gathering, since no human being is perfect, no gathering of human beings is ever going to be perfect. So maybe you take something and just maybe this faction has maybe their heart's in the right place, but they just take something just a little too far, and that's their flaw.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're just a little too zealous about something. They're going to go to extremes when it's not necessary, or
Yeah,
it could be
but that
anything else, or maybe they just can't organize their money, so they're always broke. It could be anything.
one of the, I don't remember if it's a personality trait, bond, ideal, or flaw. I know it's not a flaw, but one of those in the actual book is when I see my nemesis, or like essentially whatever word they use for the big bad, I have to fight him. Like that's what it is.
Yes,
So like, you
yes,
know, put that in the scope of like an organization. Like when I see my goal, I have to reach it no matter what the costs. And that it's a really, that's where you could have really interesting and really cool moments when you have stuff like that, because you could have characters and PCs that totally believe in the cause, but they could still not be okay with the way that the organization that they completely believe in is going about those, achieving those goals.
yeah.
Um,
And it can make a lot of those decisions. And again, this is all about adding richness to your world and adding agency to your players. If one of those characters just disagrees with something, take Anakin Skywalker and the Jedi Order. He had some serious decisions to make when the Jedi wanted to do something, and his goals, zigged when they zagged, and it just made for
yeah,
an interesting moment that he had to make some choices.
or Ahsoka.
Oh yeah, I love Ahsoka.
Yeah, like with her, we'll just call it, to avoid spoilers. We'll just call it like her arc at the end of the last season of that show, not including the new season that they made. It just shows you how extreme that like an organization can be, and how that might affect someone who like, as far as like their ideals, their personality traits, their whatever, the things that matter to them are the same things that matter to that organization.
Yep.
But that organization takes it a step too far,
She got caught in the middle.
and she got caught in the middle, and that
Yep.
changed her. That completely changed what she thinks of, the organization, that being the Jedi Order.
Absolutely. And the Jedi Order is a great example of an organization. I feel like particularly we're going to talk about flaws, and you look at the prequels, you're seeing the flaws aren't as noticeable, but the cracks are there in the foundation. And because of that, Sith chop the legs out from underneath, and all of a sudden they're in charge.
Or the New Republic, how they let the First Order come through, right?
I don't
There's
like
so
talking about
many
the sequel trilogy, Josh.
so many perfect examples
Uh,
as far as how that makes sense, and things they did for. Wait a second, no, there's no examples. It just kind of happened, didn't
yeah, and then they explained Emperor Palpatine coming back in the opening crawl.
it? No, they said it in the trailer for the movie, completely out of nowhere.
I guess
And
they had to
then,
hype up the movie.
man. So I think like some of the fun little like personality type things that you could put into an organization is like, it could be like a code, right?
Mm.
Could be like when you join, you have to say these specific words. You have to take your oath, right?
Oh
Like we
yeah.
always think about oaths in terms of like paladins in general, but why shouldn't your organization have
Oh yeah. Don't
their
limit
set
that.
of words? You know.
Oh my gosh.
So my brother-in-law, his, I don't know exactly how this works or where this like dates back to or whatever, but his last name is Cassidy, and he found out that his family words are break, don't bend, right?
Oh,
So,
interesting.
right. So like,
Wow.
if you dive into like some of the house words from Game of Thrones, right? Like you there's so much that you could learn about the great families just from the words, right?
Oh yeah.
Ours is the Fury for Baratheon. We do
Mm-hmm.
not sow the Greyjoys.
Oh
Winter
my
is coming,
gosh.
of course, is the classic. Yeah, I like Tully's, which is family, duty, honor. Lannisters is hear me roar, but then of course the one that they say more often than that is a Lannister always pays his
And that
debt.
one feels more accurate based on the way they're portrayed to me. Like,
It's more accurate, but it's like I feel like it's less words and more of like that's a fact about the Lannisters. It's not really their three words that like define them. I don't necessarily think "Hear Me Roar" is the best one for them either, but that's you know it's fine.
mm-hmm.
But like all of those little things, like you should, if you have an organization, why not give them some sort of words like that? That
Yep.
it's just a little thing that means so much. Martell, unbowed, unbent, unbroken.
Oh yeah. That's
Right?
the only
Like they're
and the thing there too is cool because that's the only one that the Targaryens didn't conquer. They had to kind of be negotiated with, which unbroken, unbent. That's just
exactly.
that's perfect.
Yeah.
We out of all the houses we came in willingly.
There's so much there. And it's just a nice little thing that says so much, right? Like what you just said, it perfectly explains that. Like those are their words. This is the whole explanation for that. And then this is why, like, those words don't even become just a piece of history. It becomes their personality for that entire family. They identify with that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I love stuff like that. And then if you want to go back to like oats,
Yeah, I was gonna say Night's
was,
Watch is just perfect for that.
yep.
It's such a powerful scene, right? John and Sam are kneeling and
Mm-hmm.
they take their oath together.
Hear my words and bear witness to my vow. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my death. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. I pledge my life and honor to the Night's Watch, for the night, for this night and all nights to come.
Yeah, I just got chills just hearing you say that.
I
And it's
do.
actually warm in this room. Like, but like, how cool was it too? I forget exactly the scene when the wall was being assaulted, and the group of them goes inside the tunnel, and they're like, "All right, every single person in there was like, we're not making it out of here," and so they all start saying those words together as they
Hmm.
charge through. Like, oh my gosh, like that was just like, yeah, like that. It adds such meaning to everything that they do.
Yeah.
And I'm getting excited, but it's because I get excited.
Well, that's what a good faction should do, right? Like it should be important like that. It should be exciting. It should like they should have these personalities, these bonds, these oaths, words, whatever that just like it means something, right? And that's that's something that like I get excited about. Like that's when you talk about making your worlds like make sense and stuff and culture and that kind of thing. Like you when you hear words like that and that's what you know about them, when you meet the people that are a part of that organization, they should either be a perfect example of that and you should know exactly what to expect before you meet them, or they should be a huge contrast of that and it's a bad thing, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
not what it's supposed to be, whether the organization has fallen from grace or like, it's not what it used to be, or this
Yes,
specific person is just not doing things the way it's supposed to be done. Like it should matter, right?
absolutely. And any deviation from the norm becomes very noteworthy to the players. And however you want to use that, whether it's, even just take the way the hobbits in Lord of the Rings, when they first see Aragorn sitting there, like he terrifies them. But that just because that's the case doesn't mean he's a bad guy. Like any deviation there should be noteworthy. And if you establish your world well enough from the beginning, they'll take notice when something's off.
Yeah.
At the very least, they'll probably be like, let's. At least I, as a player, one of my biggest things is curiosity. So I'm always like, what's going on over here? I want to learn about that.
I think we've already kind of we've been talking about like examples all throughout this,
Hmm.
but like if you're planning on making some sort of faction or organization and you want some really good ones to look at,
Yeah.
I'm gonna say we start off with Dragon Age, right?
Mm.
Dragon Age, you heard me say it before.
Oh my gosh.
Dragon Age is the gold standard. You have the Chantry. Uh, Chantry is this religious organization that is in control of so many things from the culture to the crown. They have their own military force, which is the Templars. Large part because of the Chantry, you have the Circle of Mages, which is another organization that exists basically to keep track of all the mages, right? The Templars keep them in check, and now you have another thing that exists. Again, it starts off at the Chantry. The Chantry exists and it wants to control mages. So now the Circle exists, which actually controls the mages. But now, if you have a mage that leaves the Chantry or is just operating outside of it, or leaves the Circle and is operating outside of it, now you have apostates,
Yep.
right? Which is just like a rogue mage. And then those are then hunted down by the Templars, which is the military force of the Chantry. All of that comes down, it starts off with the Chantry and then all of those organizations and then apostates, which isn't an organization, but it's like a status. All of those start from just having one really good organization
Yeah, it's like the
or one
dominoes
really
just
good
start
faction.
falling. And then I know we talked about it earlier, but the Grey Wardens, right? Drink this thing. If you don't die, you make it. And they're a lot similar in a lot of ways, similar to the Night's Watch, and that they're the ones that are constantly like being vigilant for, the big bad, the unknown, the one that should kind of
Hmm.
unite all the other factions against the one big terrible evil.
Yeah. And once you're a part of it, you're always a part of it.
Yep, that's it.
I love the Grey Wardens as an organization just because like it's one of those kind of like I feel like I mentioned it more in like a joking way before when I talked about like a law enforcement type of group, but Grey Wardens are that group, right? They don't really have any true power as like a faction. but they're respected and their power comes from that respect, and especially out
Hmm.
of necessity,
Yeah,
right?
and during a blight, they have the authority to
Exactly.
call on this agreement.
Exactly. Like, they're that group that's kind of like forgotten. Oh, they're obsessed. They're whatever. They think this is going to happen. But then when Archdemon comes and, there's a blight, suddenly they're very happy to have the Grey Wardens. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. We also talked
those,
about some examples, from Star Wars. We talked about very early in the video, the Rebel Alliance. They have this. It's like this loose organization, particularly in the beginning of its history. Kind of how factions can grow and change over time.
Mhm.
But you have these cells in different spots. Whether you're watching Star Wars Rebels, is a great place to learn about that organization and how it grew. And then you have like usually a leader or maybe two leaders in that group that kind of keep things going and just hope for the best. You know, it's a fantastic faction. Especially the underdog story there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also have the opposite, the Empire, which is just like your typical military faction, right? That's just the structure, right? You have
Yep.
your boots on the ground, stormtroopers. You have officers in charge of them. You have you have the people who are in charge of them and in charge of them, whatever. Eventually, you get to Vader. Eventually, you get to the Emperor, and of course, they do have their whole like council thing, but
Mm-hmm. The
really
Imperial
who's
Senate. It's
yeah.
the Senate. It's like the very first mention of him was just like, oh yeah, we got rid of that. He dissolved he dissolved the
Yeah,
Senate. We don't need that. But again, that says all you need to know about the Empire at that point,
yeah,
which is good.
100%. The Jedi Order, of course, we mentioned. The Jedi Order, I feel like, is much, in a lot of ways, is also kind of similar to like a Night's Watch and similar to like a Grey Warden, where they're the keepers of peace and
Hmm.
justice throughout the galaxy.
Yeah, and they're
They
looking
also
out
have
for
their
the
strict,
Sith. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, they have their specific ultimate evil that's their nemesis and they're watching out for. And if you're the Jedi, you just completely ignore them until it's too late. But there's a lot of really cool things involved in there, and they're also a good example of like a structure too. Whereas like if you're joining an organization, you start as some sort of like Padawan learner, right? Until you get up to a knight and a master, and then maybe you're part of the council, and then like
Hmm.
there's levels to it, and there is a set structure and a set path for growing and moving forward. We already talked about Game of Thrones in some detail, but they have some fantastic
Yeah.
factions that
Second
you can pull
Sons to
from.
me that's a great one. That's one that's like if you watch the show, it's not really that in the forefront, but Second Sons, right? You say have all these nobles and all these nobles' children that are not first in line to whatever title they're going to be inheriting. So they gotta go make a name for themselves somehow. They all band together and they want to take on missions and find glory there and make their own carve their own path. Simple.
Mm,
Those guys are gonna do anything.
really like that concept, honestly.
It's great.
Um,
It fueled me. One of my favorite characters. I know it's funny. We both have characters named Marcus that were nobles, but that was one of the big concepts for why my character had decided to go out. I think he was the third or fourth son of an earl, so he's trying to make his own name for himself somehow. Leads him to crazy adventures. Simple.
and my favorite would be the Night's Watch.
Good.
In some ways, it's like a broken organization, right? Of like it's formed up of criminals and thieves and rapists and like terrible people, and a lot of the time they don't do what they're supposed to do. But then you have those people like Jon Snow, right?
Gior
Who
Mormont. Yeah.
just exemplify. They're an example of like exactly what you would expect for that type of thing, right? They have things that matter to them that it frustrates them that they can't because they took their oath, and that means something to them.
Oh
So
my
and
gosh. Yeah.
that pops back into something that like one that we were talking about earlier, how you mentioned like sometimes like you have a simple organization and a complex character, right? You have an organization where they're so extreme in their goal of
Mm.
their, you know, their goal is protecting the realms of men, right?
Yep.
And the watching the wall and whatever, that they are not allowed to do anything else. They can't, he can't go down and help his brother fight, you know,
Uh,
and all that stuff there. So now you have him as a character who he's ready to just get up and leave, right? But he can't do it because he took his oath and that means something to him. Um, and that's just makes for really interesting, really cool storytelling.
totally agree. So one thing that's really fun is and yes, she has been here the whole time, but so Kim and I, my wife and I, we have a nickname for Hermione because, you know, Hermione Granger is what she's named after, but because she looks like a crow from the Night's Watch, sometimes we call her Hermione Ranger.
We talked about like a hierarchy, right? And like levels to an organization and that kind of thing, where, you know, like Padawan, Knight, Master, Council, all that kind of stuff. One really cool thing that you could do with your faction is, I mean, first off, I would say know who's in charge of that faction. You should understand your faction before you even present it to the players. You know, you should know how it operates, how big it is, how powerful it is, all that kind of stuff. Is there some sort of big, like the Corleone crime family, where you have the Godfather, you have the
Yeah.
consigliere, you have the like, you know, you have all of these
Mm-hmm.
people, and it's all set like that? Is it more loose? You should know what the structure looks like. And you should absolutely know who's in charge. Whether your players know who's in charge or not, that's completely different. You should know who's in charge. And one thing you could do to really throw people off and just have some fun and really make an interesting organization is kind of what we joked about in the intro, right? Where you have this whole crazy organization, or maybe not so crazy organization. You meet the leader, and maybe it's something silly like, yeah, it's a mini schnauzer. Maybe it's like a sphinx or a dragon. Maybe it's a red dragon. Maybe it's a gold dragon. Like, you know, any,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's a beholder. You know, like there's a lot you could do, especially if you have like cells in the organization, right? So like you're reporting to someone who's reporting to someone else, and you think that the someone else who your person is reporting to is the one who's like really in charge and really has the power, and then you find out, oh no, it's
Yeah. Plausible
he's
deniability. That's why you never knew.
yeah. Oh, okay. Well, now we're talking about like the Joker
Yeah.
uh bank robbery scene in Dark Knight, right? Are you gonna kill me? No, I'm supposed to kill the bus driver. What? You know,
Yeah.
like, but like having some sort of grand like creature or being be in charge of an organization is really interesting, because then you start asking yourselves questions like, well, okay, well, one, why does a creature of this big or of this importance or of this power, why does it feel the need to be in control of like some sort of organization and like
Yeah.
have boots on the ground and that kind of stuff? Like, what is it hoping to gain from that,
Like a
aside
hidden
from,
agenda.
yes,
Yes.
and also what does that mean for the world, that
Mm-hmm.
this massively powerful creature now has a massively powerful organization?
Absolutely. Establishing trust. I mean, that's Emperor Palpatine, you know, getting set up too. It's
Yeah.
that's fantastic, Josh. It also really works well if it ends up being like the big bad of your story, or the players are just being players and they want to attack the leader of an organization. Like, well, it's a Sphinx, so good luck with that.
That's a kind of a cool thing too, because you could have your players part of this fighting guild or thieves guild, or you know, uh school or something, and they're there for a specific reason. They want to learn more about one specific thing. Come to find out that the evil that they swore to fight against is actually secretly in charge of this organization that they're a
Yep.
part of. It's like the Potter series, right? Where you have, I don't know the lore super well, but like essentially this like wizarding government, if you
Mm-hmm.
will, is really
The
being
Ministry of
controlled by,
Magic.
The mystery of magic. Thank you. When you go to the top there, well, it's actually being controlled by Voldemort, right? Like
Oh yeah, especially once
that's
he gets his claws in or his roots deep inside the
mhm,
organization.
yeah.
Things start to
And
act a little weird or maybe a little counter to some of the ideals that are established, and it's like, well, why? What's going on? Why? I don't understand.
yeah, exactly what you just said is why setting expectations and really having things make sense is so important because if you decide to do something like that, where you have this organization that is supposed to be good, it's supposed to be pushing forward this specific idea, when suddenly, even if it's subtle and it's not doing that and it's going against what you thought it was there for, that's important and your players notice that, and that's when you're able to drop in little clues and hints of things that are happening in the background, and that's huge
Absolutely.
for a campaign. So, what kind of resources are out there for just helping you out and trying to make like some sort of faction or anything like that?
Yeah, I think for me, at least if you're going to go with, we usually use D&D 5e as the example for everything. So I love using the idea of personality bonds, flaws, and ideals, and having that be at least something that you can use to represent like how your faction's going to interact with the world. But if you're
Hmm.
looking for inspiration, not only can you look to media like Star Wars or Dragon Age and things like that, but Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. The group patron section has some good examples, I think, and maybe some ways that you could have a good way that your characters and players can advance in an organization if they're interested in it. I think in that way, Theros and the piety system could also be kind of used. I know Star Wars Saga Edition has had different ways so you had like this faction score, and like if you were of a certain level, that might be a few points towards that. Maybe if you had some kind of like big gaff and like you messed something up that would like remove from your score, you're kind of like infamous. Like you could do this a lot of different ways. So there's some ways, some resources out there for that.
Another one actually that it definitely wouldn't be like my first choice, but if you have it or if you have access to it, if it's on sale or whatever, Acquisitions Incorporated,
Mm.
their book, while it comes from a place of like comedy and if you've seen it before, then like you know what you're getting into. They give you rules for like growing a franchise essentially, and like they have these jobs and stuff and like titles and how that works in there, and they have like specific backgrounds and stuff in there too. Again, like that's not the end all be all, but there's definitely options in there that you could pull from and use to make a really nice faction in a serious campaign. So we hope that was helpful for you. If you made a really cool faction and there's a cool story behind it, or you just want to tell us about it, let us know in the comments. Let us know in Discord because we actually love to hear stories like that. And
Absolutely.
if you have a favorite faction or organization from like pop culture or whatever that we didn't mention, love to hear about that too.
Mhm.
Because maybe we've never heard of it before, or maybe we have and we're going to kick ourselves for not mentioning it.
Like, why did we not think of that?
So please just drop a like, comment, comment like actual things. You could also just comment like hi and that kind of stuff if you want. But let us know about your factions because we want to hear about it. And then subscribe and hit that bell so you'll know when we do have like future projects going on.
It's Josh's thinking face right there.
Heard. Heard. Uh,
He's typing in our notes right now. That's what it is.
oh, are we recording right now?
I think that's a good outro, Hermione.